My name is Sarah, I'm 28, and I came home one evening to find my pregnant sister and my own fiancé demanding I leave my house because the baby was his. Before I tell you about the look on their faces when I revealed the secret that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's a wild story, and I think you'll want to stick around for the end. This story really begins 9 years ago, with an inheritance. It wasn't a vast fortune, just the house my grandparents had lived in for 50 years. They were the kindest, most stable people in my life, and when they passed away within months of each other, it felt like my world had lost its anchor. They left me their house, a solid, 4-bedroom home on 3 acres of land that had seen better days. To me, it wasn't just a property, it was the last piece of them I had left. It was a palace of memories. The house had good bones, but it needed a tremendous amount of work. I was 19, working my way through community college, but I made a promise to them, and to myself, that I would bring it back to life. For the next 9 years, that house became my life's work. Every spare dollar from my salary, every weekend, every holiday was poured into its restoration. I learned how to patch drywall from YouTube videos, my arms aching and covered in white dust. I learned how to lay tile in the bathroom, spending an entire weekend on my knees, meticulously placing each piece. I tore out the overgrown, thorny bushes in the front yard and learned, through trial and a lot of error, how to cultivate a garden. I remember the first year a single, perfect rose bloomed on a bush I had nurtured back from near death. I actually cried. This house wasn't just wood and nails, it was my sanctuary, my college fund in physical form, my sweat equity, my pride. It was me. My relationship with my younger sister, Jessica, has always been strained. She's 4 years younger, and for as long as I can remember, she has been the sun around which our family orbits. I have photo albums filled with proof. Jessica at her dance recital, Jessica with her soccer trophy, Jessica beaming in a tiara on her sweet 16. I'm usually in the background, a blurry figure on the edge of the frame, just happy to be included. Our parents never meant to be cruel, I don't think. They just saw 2 different daughters. Jessica was the fragile, sparkling one who needed constant praise and protection. I was the responsible, capable one who could take care of herself. When she got an A, it was a cause for a celebration dinner. When I got a promotion at work, my mother would say, "That's nice, dear," before her voice would light up, "Oh, you'll never guess what Jessica did today." This lifelong dynamic forged a sense of entitlement in Jessica that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. She moved through life with the serene confidence of someone who has never been told no, who believes that what she wants, she deserves. And for the most part, the world seemed to agree with her. 6 months ago, her charmed world apparently hit a speed bump. My fiancé, Mark, the man I'd been with for 3 years, approached me with that serious, furrowed brow look he got when he was about to ask for something. "Jessica's going through a really hard time," he'd said, his voice soft and reasonable. "She broke up with that guy, Alex, and she lost her job. She's really struggling, Sarah. She needs a place to land for a little while. She's your family." I hesitated. Every instinct I had screamed a resounding no. I remembered all the times I'd bailed her out of trouble, paid a bill she'd forgotten, or lent her money she never paid back. I called my best friend, Claire, later that day. Her reaction was immediate. "Are you insane?" she'd said. "You're letting the viper into your nest. Don't do it, Sarah. You're finally happy. She'll ruin it." But then I looked at Mark. He seemed so earnest. He was a good man, or so I believed. His defining characteristic was his desire to keep the peace, to smooth over any conflict. And he was right about one thing: Jessica was my sister. You help family when they're down. That's what good people do. That's what my grandparents would have done. Okay, I sighed, silencing the warning bells in my head. She can stay in the guest room. But just temporarily. Until she gets back on her feet. That was my first mistake. A catastrophic, life-altering mistake. The first few weeks were deceptively calm, the quiet before a hurricane. Jessica was on her best behavior, mostly staying in her room, full of sad sighs and dramatic pronouncements about her terrible luck. I felt a pang of sympathy. Maybe Claire was wrong. Maybe she had finally grown up. Then, the campaign began. It was subtle at first. I came home from a long day at work to find my living room furniture, which I had painstakingly arranged for optimal light and comfort, completely rearranged. My cozy reading chair was shoved in a dark corner. "It just had better feng shui this way, don't you think?" she'd said, not asking, but informing me as she filed her nails on my couch. My couch. A few days later, I opened the fridge to make a salad and found that all the fresh, organic vegetables I'd bought at the farmer's market were gone. In their place were tubs of ice cream, frozen pizzas, and sugary sodas. "Oh, sorry," she chirped without a hint of apology. "I just can't stand all that rabbit food. I did you a favor and cleared out the clutter." She was an invasive species, slowly but surely choking out my life and replacing it with her own. My favorite coffee mug, a simple ceramic one I'd had since my first apartment, vanished. In its place on the hook was a garish, glittery pink thing with a unicorn on it. When I asked where my mug was, she'd shrugged. "I think it got chipped. I threw it out. This one's way cuter, anyway." She was treating me like an unwelcome, out-of-touch roommate in my own home. She'd complain about the noise I made getting ready for work at 7 a.m. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong. All while not contributing a single dollar to the mortgage, the utilities, or the groceries. Mark, my peace-loving fiancé, was worse than useless. He was an enabler. "She's just trying to make the place feel like home, honey," he'd say, patting my arm dismissively when I tried to vent my frustration. "She has a fresh perspective. You've got to admit, the living room does look more modern." I started to notice how much he was enjoying her fresh perspective. Their laughter would drift from the living room while I was in the kitchen cooking dinner for all three of us. I'd walk in to find them huddled close on the couch, sharing some secret on her phone. They'd spring apart when they saw me, not with the guilt of an affair, but with the annoyance of a private club whose meeting had just been interrupted by a janitor. A cold, heavy knot of dread began to form in my stomach. It was a feeling I knew all too well from my childhood, the feeling of being on the outside looking in, of being secondary in my own life. The tension simmered for months, a low-grade fever that left me constantly on edge. The breaking point, the moment I knew I had to act, came on a Tuesday evening. I came home a little early from work, exhausted and ready to just have a quiet night. As I walked down the hall, I heard their hushed voices coming from the spare room I used as a home office. I pushed the door open. They were huddled over my laptop, the screen glowing on their faces. I saw charts. I saw interest rates. I saw the logo of a major bank. They were looking up divorce settlements and mortgage refinancing options. For my house. "What are you two doing?" My voice was quiet, but it sliced through the air like a shard of glass. They jumped like they'd been electrocuted. Mark slammed the laptop shut so hard the plastic creaked in protest. "Sarah! You're home early." His face was beet red, a bead of sweat on his temple. "We were just looking at design ideas," Jessica said, recovering with the speed of a seasoned liar. "Thinking of ways to increase the property value. For you, of course. For me." The audacity of it, the sheer, bald-faced lie, stole the air from my lungs. They weren't just overstepping, they were plotting. A sick, horrifying picture began to form in my mind, a puzzle of whispers and shared glances and late-night computer sessions. I was being pushed out of my own life, one rearranged cushion at a time. "Get away from my computer," I said, my voice tight with a rage I could barely contain. "And stop making plans for a house that is not yours." The argument that followed was the ugliest we'd ever had. Mark accused me of being paranoid and inhospitable. Jessica, with tears in her eyes that didn't reach her cold, calculating gaze, accused me of being jealous of her and Mark's special bond. They were a team, a united front of gaslighting and manipulation. They turned my legitimate anger back on me, making me feel like the crazy one. That night, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the house feeling alien and hostile around me. I knew then, with absolute certainty, that it had to end. I would talk to Mark the next day, alone. I would give him an ultimatum. It was either Jessica or me. I never got the chance. They made their move first. The very next evening, I walked through the front door into an ambush. It was staged. Mark and Jessica were sitting side by side on the couch, their hands clasped together in their laps. There was an air of grave ceremony about it, like a king and queen about to deliver a royal proclamation to a lowly subject. "Sarah, we need to have a family meeting," Mark said, his voice heavy with false solemnity. I stood there, my work bag digging into my shoulder, and just looked at them. Jessica had a small, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She placed a hand protectively, almost performatively, over her stomach. "I'm pregnant," she announced, her eyes locked on mine, gleaming with victory. "And Mark's the father." The words didn't just hang in the air, they detonated. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It was a physical sensation, a violent lurch in my gut so intense I had to grip the back of a chair to stay upright. My hearing went fuzzy, a high-pitched ringing that drowned out everything but the frantic thumping of my own heart. I looked at Mark, the man whose proposal I had accepted, the man whose children I had imagined having. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. Before I could form a single word, before my brain could even begin to process the dual layers of this monstrous betrayal, Jessica continued, her voice dripping with a cloying, false sympathy. "So, obviously, with the baby coming, we're going to need more space. A proper nursery. We'll need your master bedroom. We thought you could move into the smaller guest room, but honestly," she paused, for dramatic effect, "it's probably best if you just find your own place." Find my own place. My own place. The words echoed in the roaring silence of my mind. They weren't just telling me about their affair. They were evicting me. From the house my grandparents left me. From the home I had built with my own two hands. Mark finally spoke, his voice still directed at the wall, as if addressing a ghost. "We've already found a great little studio apartment for you downtown, Sarah. It's all settled. We even paid the deposit for the first month's rent. You can be moved out by this weekend." The sheer, unmitigated, breathtaking gall of it was what finally broke through the paralyzing shock. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had meticulously planned my disposal. They had discussed my future, made executive decisions about my life, and spent money on my next residence, all without my knowledge or consent. I wasn't a person to them. I was an obstacle to be managed, a piece of inconvenient furniture to be moved out of the way. Jessica, mistaking my stunned, horrified silence for surrender, stood up with a sigh of theatrical magnanimity. "I'll help you start packing," she said, her voice bright and condescending, as if she were doing me the world's biggest favor. She started walking towards my bedroom, my master bedroom, with the clear intention of boxing up my life and my identity. And that's when something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic snap. It was a quiet, cold, and definitive fracture. The hurt, the shock, the nausea, it all receded, replaced by an icy, crystalline calm. In that moment of absolute clarity, I thought of my grandparents. I thought of the promise I'd made to them, to cherish this home, to fill it with life and love. I thought of every splinter under my fingernails, every drop of sweat that had fallen on these floors. And then I looked at my sister. She was reaching for the doorknob to my room. She stopped. She must have seen the change in my expression, the storm gathering behind my eyes. To cover her hesitation, she turned and walked over to my bookshelf. She picked up a small, wooden music box, its varnish worn smooth with age. My grandmother had given it to me on my 10th birthday. It played "You Are My Sunshine," the song she used to sing to me. It was my most treasured possession. "This old thing?" Jessica said, holding it up with 2 fingers as if it were a piece of trash. Who even keeps this junk? She made a move to toss it into the nearby wastebasket. Don't. My voice was low, flat, but it carried a weight that stopped her cold. She froze, her hand hovering over the bin. Don't, I said again, enunciating each word like a chip of ice. You. Touch. My. Things. I walked past her, my movements deliberate, robotic. I went to the heavy, oak cabinet in the corner of the room, the one my grandfather had built with his own hands. It was where I kept the important things. The things that mattered. The things that proved ownership. Mark started to say something, apathetic, pleading, "Sarah, don't make this harder than it has to be." I tuned him out. My fingers, surprisingly steady, found the cool brass handle of the bottom drawer. I pulled it open. Inside, nestled among old photo albums and letters, was a thick, legal-sized folder. I took it out and walked back to the coffee table. I didn't slam it down. I placed it. The sound was soft, but in the tense, charged atmosphere of the room, it echoed like a gavel. Jessica scoffed, trying to regain control. "What's that? Your diary? Are you going to write about how mean we are?" "No," I said, not looking at her. My eyes were fixed on Mark. "Mark, you told Jessica that you and I co-owned this house, didn't you? That you had a financial stake in it. That you were an investor." Mark's face went from flushed to a pasty, sickly white. He finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw raw, undiluted fear in his eyes. He started to stammer, "Well, I helped with groceries, and—" "Silence," I said. The word was not a request. He fell silent. I opened the folder. Inside, pristine and protected in a heavy plastic sleeve, was the deed to the house. I slid it out and laid it flat on the table, smoothing its crisp edges with my hand. The paper was thick, official, embossed with the county seal. My name was there, typed in clear, black ink. Sarah N. Miller. And below it, in the space for a second owner, there was nothing. Just an empty, damning line. "There's a funny thing about this house, Jessica," I said, my voice as calm and level as a frozen lake. "It's part of the inheritance I received from my grandparents. Every single cent that went into the down payment, every single mortgage payment for the past 9 years, every single property tax bill, has come directly from my bank account. From my salary. From my hard work." I finally lifted my eyes from the document to meet hers. Her smug, triumphant smile was gone, frozen on her face like a grotesque mask of disbelief. "Mark has never contributed a single penny to this property," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word of truth. "His name isn't on the mortgage. It's not on the insurance. And it sure as hell," I tapped the deed with my index finger, the sound sharp and definitive in the silent room, "is not on this. This house is mine," I declared, my voice ringing with a power I never knew I possessed. "Mine alone. And you too." My gaze swept over both of them, 2 traitors sitting on my couch, in my house, our guests. "And your visit is officially over." The silence that followed was the most profoundly satisfying sound I have ever heard. It was a dense, heavy silence, filled with the sound of their arrogant, selfish world shattering into a million pieces. Jessica's face, which had been alight with triumph just moments before, crumpled. The color drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, mottled white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish on a dock, gasping for air, for a reality that no longer existed. Mark looked like he'd been physically struck. He was staring at the deed as if it were a venomous snake, his hands trembling in his lap. The man who, mere minutes ago, was calmly explaining how he'd found me a new apartment, was now utterly, completely broken. Jessica, true to form, recovered first. Her shock morphed into a familiar, ugly rage, the last defense of the entitled when their world doesn't bend to their will. "This is just a technicality," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "A piece of paper. It doesn't matter. I'm pregnant. We're a family. We need this space more than you do. You can't just throw us out into the street." "Oh, I can," I said, my voice still dangerously quiet. "And I will." I reached back into the folder. I had been so shaken by their mortgage browsing stunt that I had spent my lunch break that day on a legal website. You see, I had a feeling things were heading in a bad direction. I spoke to a lawyer last month, just to understand my options. This was a small lie, but a necessary one. The word lawyer hung in the air, heavy and sharp with consequence. "This," I said, pulling out 2 more documents I had printed and filled out, "is a formal, 30-day notice to vacate for both of you." I placed one in front of Mark and one in front of Jessica, like a dealer laying down the final, losing cards in a game they didn't even know they were playing. "And Jessica," I added, looking directly at my sister, the cold fury now a precise, surgical instrument. "Since you seem to believe this is all just business, let's treat it that way. You've been living here, consuming my resources, for 6 months. The market rate for a room in a house this size, in this neighborhood, is approximately $2,500 a month. That comes to a total of $15,000. I have records of every utility bill, every grocery receipt. I expect a check. Otherwise, my lawyer will be in touch about filing a lawsuit for back rent and damages." The threat of a lawsuit, of being held financially accountable, was the final, devastating blow. Jessica stared at the paper in front of her, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief and fury. The idea of having to pay for something she believed she was entitled to for free was so foreign to her, it literally broke her brain. Mark finally found his voice, a weak, reedy, pathetic thing. "Sarah, please. Don't do this. We can talk about this. We can fix this." "The time for talking is over, Mark," I said, standing up, feeling taller than I ever had in my life. "You have 30 days. I suggest you start packing." I picked up my grandmother's music box, its worn with a comforting weight in my hand, and walked into my bedroom, closing and locking the door behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on my bed, in the silent, humming aftermath of the explosion I had detonated, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt the ground solid and unshakable beneath my feet. The next 2 weeks were a strange, tense limbo, a cold war fought in the hallways of my own home. Jessica refused to speak to me, communicating only through slammed doors and insults muttered just loud enough for me to hear. She treated me with a venomous contempt, as if I were the one who had wronged her. Mark tried a different, more pathetic tactic. He would leave little notes on my door, "I'm so sorry, please talk to me," as if a few scribbled words could undo the chasm of his betrayal. He would try to catch me in the hallway, his face a pathetic mask of remorse. But I saw it for what it was. He wasn't sorry for the betrayal. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry his comfortable, subsidized life was imploding. One evening, about a week before the 30-day notice was up, he cornered me in the kitchen as I was making a cup of tea. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes were rumpled, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He wasn't there to apologize, not really. He was there to negotiate. "Sarah, look, I know I messed up," he started, his voice a low, pleading whine. "I know I did. But this is all Jessica's fault. You know how she is. She gets these ideas in her head, she's so manipulative, she twisted everything around." He was actually trying to blame her, to paint himself as her hapless victim. The cowardice was stunning. "We don't have to go to court. We can work this out. Maybe you can just let us stay until the baby is born, just to have some stability for the custody arrangements." I just looked at him, my face a blank mask. The man I once thought I would marry, the man I had loved, was a complete stranger to me now, a weak, sniveling parasite. I didn't say a word. I just walked to the front hall table, where a large manila envelope had been sitting for a day. I picked it up and handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked, his voice wary. "It's a copy of the eviction filing," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "My lawyer filed it with the court this morning. The sheriff will be here to escort you both off my property in 7 days if you're not gone. Now, if you'll excuse me." I walked around him, leaving him standing there in the dim light of the kitchen, holding the legal proof of his spectacular failure in his trembling hands. The final twist, the one that even I, in my wildest imaginings, didn't see coming, wasn't delivered by me. It was delivered by science. The day after my kitchen confrontation with Mark, he and Jessica had a screaming match that rattled the windows. I was in my room with the door locked, but I could hear every venomous word. I heard phrases like "you lied to me," and "how could you be so stupid," and something about a rich ex-boyfriend. The next morning, Mark was gone. He'd packed a single bag and vanished. Jessica stayed, sullen and silent, clearly believing she could still wait me out, that her pregnancy was an invincible shield. A week later, just 2 days before the eviction deadline, my friend Claire came over, a bottle of wine in one hand and her phone in the other, her face a mask of absolute, gleeful shock. "You are not going to believe this," she said, shoving the phone in my face. "You need to read this. Now." It was an anonymous post on a local community forum, a site where people aired their grievances. The post was titled, "My girlfriend lied about a pregnancy to trap me." The details were so specific, so raw, there was no doubt who had written it. It was from a man, ranting with the fury of a scorned fool. He wrote that after their big fight, his suspicions had gotten the better of him. He had remembered Jessica talking about her ex-boyfriend, Alex, and how he came from a wealthy family. Driven by a desperate, last-ditch paranoia, he had demanded she take a prenatal paternity test, one of those new, advanced ones you can do early in the pregnancy with just a blood draw. He wrote that he had just gotten the results back that morning. Probability of paternity, 0%. The post was a torrent of humiliation and rage. He wrote that she had finally confessed. She had been seeing her wealthy ex-boyfriend on the side the entire time. The baby was his. She had concocted the entire scheme to drive a wedge between me and Mark, hoping to secure a stable place to live and manipulate Mark into a long-term commitment, effectively getting a free house and a doting fool to raise another man's child. She had gambled that Mark was too weak and too smitten to ever question it. She was almost right. The post was a public self-flagellation. Mark wasn't just a cheater, he was the dupe, the mark, the sucker in a much larger, more humiliating con. That night, Jessica packed her bags. There was no drama, no final confrontation, no tearful goodbyes. She simply made a phone call. An hour later, a sleek, black Mercedes I recognized as belonging to her ex-boyfriend pulled into my driveway. She dragged her suitcases out the front door without a single word to me, without even a backward glance. She just vanished into the night, like a bad dream at sunrise. After she left, the house was quiet. It was a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. For the first few days, I just walked from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, as if reintroducing myself to my own life. I was reclaiming my space. I threw out the glittery unicorn mug with a satisfying smash into the bottom of the trash can. I moved the living room furniture back to where it belonged, where the morning sun would hit my reading chair just right. I bought sage and burned it in every corner, a ritual to cleanse the air of their lies and their presence. I scrubbed every surface, as if I could wash away the memory of them from the very wood and plaster of the house. One afternoon, I was standing in the empty guest room, the room that had been Jessica's. It felt cold, tainted, a monument to the betrayal that had happened within these walls. I knew I couldn't just leave it empty. It needed a new purpose, a new energy. An idea started to form, a way to turn this ugly, painful chapter into something good, something meaningful. I thought about my grandfather, a kind, generous man who everyone in the family called Poppy. He always used to say that a house isn't a home until you share it, until its warmth touches more than just you. I spent the next month on a new project. I wasn't just restoring a room, I was performing an exorcism. I painted the walls a warm, calming shade of sage green. I bought a new, comfortable bed with soft, high-quality linens. I found a small, sturdy desk at a flea market and refinished it myself. I hung simple, beautiful prints of botanical drawings on the walls. I was creating a haven. Then I made a phone call. I contacted a local women's shelter, an organization that helps women transition out of abusive or toxic living situations. I told them my story, or at least a version of it. I told them I had a room, a safe, private, beautiful space, and I wanted to offer it, free of charge, for a month or two at a time, to a woman who just needed a place to land, a place to breathe, a place to get back on her feet. I called it Poppy's Room. My journey wasn't about revenge. I realized that as I hung the final picture on the wall of that clean, peaceful room. Revenge is a hot, messy fire that consumes you. What I felt was a cold, clean sense of justice, of scales being rebalanced. This was about reclaiming not just my house, but my self-respect. It was about taking the ugliest experience of my life and transforming it into a source of strength and hope for someone else. It was about honoring my grandparents in the truest way I knew how. A few days ago, I welcomed the first resident of Poppy's Room. She was a woman in her 50s, a survivor of a long, emotionally abusive marriage. Her eyes were tired, but they were full of a fierce, quiet strength that I recognized immediately. She had a small suitcase and a cardboard box with her name on it. That was all she had left from a 30-year marriage. As I handed her the key to the room, a simple, shiny brass key, she looked at me, her eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I just smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "You don't have to," I said. "Just take a deep breath. You're safe now. Welcome home." And as I watched her close the door to her new, temporary sanctuary, I stood in the hallway of my house, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was finally, truly home, too. Thanks so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it helps someone out there who might be feeling small in their own life. What's one thing you've done to reclaim your own space or your own power? I'd love to read about it in the comments. And if you found any value in this, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories. It really does help.